Hello, and welcome to the Rolewise Podcast, your show where we talk about things related to tabletop RPGs. And today we are specifically talking about the Cosmere role-playing game by Brotherwise Games, Brandon Sanderson, and all that stuff. We actually recently played a little bit of the Cosmere RPG beta on our live stream. And so if you're interested to see how the initial adventure plays, you can actually catch the 2 episodes that we have in a playlist, which I'm going to try to put somewhere in the show notes, so you can just watch it. It was a lot of fun. It allowed us who are non-Sanderson fans to kind of get into the world, see how it plays a little bit, and kind of experience the new rules. Those of you that have been paying attention, of course, though, know that the Cosmere RPG did land with a splash. And my gosh, seeing that thing just hit Kickstarter and light up. I mean, Brandon Sanderson's pretty much like the Kickstarter whisperer at this point. Do you guys remember how much it raised again?
Like $14.6 million or something.
Yeah, like I mean, that makes that, of course, I think if my memory serves,
million with an M, because it's worth repeating.
Yeah, $14.6 million with an M, to like 50,000 backers. I mean, that is just an absolutely huge launch to a game. And so even if many of those people may not, it might be more of a cosmetic thing, kind of goes on the shelf because they might just be fans of Sanderson. The game itself seems to be made of pretty high quality stuff. So I think it's a good conversation to kind of relay our experience to you. Let us know how we feel at least the beta of the game is going. And then, of course, if you're interested, the game should be coming out later.
Oh yeah, the Kickstarter just ended. I don't about a year. I thought is what they.
Yeah, I didn't back it. They usually, for backers, if anybody did back it, let us know. You should have something that tells you when they think they'll have it out to you. So let us know in the comments. We'd appreciate it. And just for the record, the adventure is called bridgenine, which is, again, in case anybody doesn't know, like I didn't and was confused at first, it's people actually carrying a bridge, not like a spaceship.
Yeah, it's not Deep Space Nine or anything.
Yeah. You're not the bridge crew. No, I'm in the camp with Brent. I kind of thought that it was something different than it was. I mean, I knew the Shattered Lands, Splintered Lands. Now I'm just showing how little I know about Cosmere.
The Shattered Plains, maybe.
The Shattered Plains, yes. That there are chasms and that they need to be bridged. But I would have assumed that we were on a crew building bridge, like more permanent stuff rather than what felt like hauling the same temporary bridge, over. And then
it didn't feel like that. Over. It was exactly that. Yeah. Which was, I was a little, when you were like, pick bridge crew, I was like, what? Like, are we on a boat? I was a little confused at first. And then you're like, oh,
we get upgraded to airship.
We pick up the bridge and move it. Like, that makes sense. And I believe it's something that is fairly, like, I know that that did happen, but it was still weird at first where I was like, bridgenine is what it's
so bridgenine. And so if you guys are interested in running the adventure, I think it's on Drive-Thru RPG, and they have a version of it on Demiplane. We didn't use the Demiplane version. I just used the PDF to run these guys through, and obviously I took some of the images so these guys could have something that visual to kind of help them see how the world feels and looks and everything like that. Because the one thing that it's interesting to play through the game, but I feel like this was a good step to introduce you to Roshar. Now, I guess before we get into it too much, the Cosmere RPG is supposed to be like, the full Sanderson Cosmere universe. So, you'd have the Stormlight Archive, which appears to be the first release, Mistborn, which I believe the second release. They have future releases planned from that. So it does seem as though there's going to be a setting for every fan of the Cosmere RPG, the Cosmere universe. So if you like the Stormlight Archive, but it's not your favorite, I would just wait, and there's probably going to be one of the other novels coming out. But for us, getting to Roshar, I mean, Roshar is a fairly alien world to what we've typically played in. I mean, your swords and sorcery, like elves, dwarves, blah 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 blah, all of those seem to be missing from this based on our first playthrough, because other than humans and singers, those were the only two basically ancestries that you could pick from. I mean, I feel like that's an interesting take, because what's neat is that we typically, at least whenever I play a fantasy RPG, for some reason I'm just like, human. Just put me as a human. I don't know why, but it's just the fact that I'm in a game now. I'm like, I can really only play one of two things. I'm like, oh man, I thought about playing a dwarf this time.
Well, it's the same. It's the same thing as kind of like what we were talking about, our what the players know sort of thing. Like, you know how to be a human.
Yeah.
You might not know how to be a lizard man, or you know, like those, because they are intrinsically, they're a little bit alien. Like, so I think that's different, and it is a high fantasy setting, but yeah, it doesn't have any of the high fantasy races in it, which is kind of interesting. The stock high fantasy races, so that's interesting. He's definitely built his own cosmology that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, but don't take that lack of ancestries to be a lack of creativity, because when you guys saw the number of cultures and everything like that the humans had available from Demiplane, you guys saw that there was a ton there, right? I mean, there was just like there was I mean, first of all, you guys were on the Shattered Plane, so you're basically your largest group was going to be the Alethi, but I felt that just the diversity among different cultures that you could you could play at gave you a lot of role-playing opportunities.
Yeah, there's a lot of options for character creation. Like, it didn't seem wanting for your options on making characters.
And I mean, if anybody's interested, Demiplane has a ton of information, and you can just build character after character after character and read about all the different, like Mike said, I'm not sure cultures is the right word, but
the ancestry, and then you choose your culture.
Okay. Then you choose the culture. So yeah, there's a lot of cultures that give a ton of flavor to the individual character that you're wanting to build.
And of course, if you've read the novels, you obviously know a lot more about each of these cultures. So you might be a little bit more, you might find one more appealing than the other based on your own experiences with the books and stuff like that. The one thing I don't think we really got to see is a ton of the magic of the world. Like, that didn't seem as though it was a really present item from like a world building standpoint, even though magic is very important in the books, based on one of our friends who's a fairly avid Sanderson fan. And so, like, you guys saw a little bit, in so much as that you did see spren, quite a bit of spren, which I thought it's kind of a neat way to flavor the world when you talk about spren and everything like that. And I included spren several times throughout the adventure, but how did that represent to you guys? Did you guys enjoy that visual representation of things? Or
I actually did. I thought it added a lot of flavor without having to add a lot of stuff. Like, you just say, oh, there's pain spren, or I mean, you were a little more descriptive than that, but I actually liked it. Brent, what did you think?
Yeah, no, I think it was good in that it's something that lore-wise and flavor-wise made the story distinctive from other games. Like, because again, like, without that background of knowing Roshar and stuff like that, like, it just felt like a fantasy setting. Like, I'm just a human doing human things in this fantasy setting. Whereas the addition of certain things like that did make it feel quite a bit different, which I enjoyed. Yeah, it was good.
And the one thing I like about the spren, and maybe this is just because obviously I don't know about the novels, and it might be an amateur take on this, but I liked the fact that spren could be used as a shortcut to describe areas without being a meta GM, right? Like, you could be like, oh, well, like in spoilers are going to be in this episode, so I'm going to say it now, because we're talking about our experience with bridgenine and Cosmere.
Yep.
But I like the idea that when Captain Selenar is basically getting, you're facing off with him and basically trying to get him to not kill one of the bridgemen, to leave it as kind of a snack for the chasm fiend. You challenging his authority tends to get his, tends to invoke the thrill, this kind of like bloodlust in him. And so spren appear at his feet, and they form kind of pools of blood. And I think that that's an interesting shortcut that you can use, that as opposed to, like, if I wanted to say, okay, well, in D&D, his eyes turn red, they dilate, and his veins bulge, you can kind of make it, but you have the spren are a little bit more distinct in so much as that they have certain evocative ideas that are with them.
I think the spren were a nice shorthand for implying that something might happen. Like, when the spren showed up in the swamp, the rot spren, I think is what you said they were.
The rot spren.
Like that, we knew something was wrong. based on that. So, and I think that's a kind of a nice shorthand for storytelling within the universe.
Yeah, and there are a lot of spren too. So it's like, like and as part of the adventure, you attract the attention. And since we weren't going to be continuing this adventure, at least not in the short term, you can attract the adventure of 2 spren based on your actions throughout the adventure. And so you can actually develop affinities with spren that eventually allow you to turn into radiants. Now, this is where I think I have zero ideas, like from a story perspective, because I don't know what the radiants really are, other than like they're the people that swear the ideas, the radiant knights or whatever, and then they get shard plate and shard blades and all of those kind of things. So the opportunity for you to attract spren was part of your role-playing choices. So did you choose to protect the bridge crew? Oh, well, you've attracted a spren that's devoted to the ideas of protection. Did you try to escape the chasm? You attract a spren that is devoted to the ideas of freedom, and of course, so on and so forth. And I think that that's kind of an interesting, I think it's just a dynamic that I hadn't seen in a lot of other fantasy games played out, at least.
No, but it is something that's unique to this setting, right? That's one of the things that I noticed for really a very short, one shot that's just designed for first level characters. I feel like I know the Cosmere a little bit better than when I did. It did a lot to give you a feeling for the setting, even if you aren't experienced. And if you're experienced, there had to be more to pick up on than the stuff that we did.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think that's kind of, I think there's just so much more if you knew the setting that you could really have gotten out of it. But I don't think we had a bad experience, obviously, because we didn't know.
No, it was a really good experience.
And I think truthfully, if you'd really tried to like give everybody everything about Roshar and one little
adventure, that's not what an introductory adventure is about.
that would have been too much.
I think it was a perfect introduction to the mechanics of the game. I think it showed off the mechanics really well. It was a little heavy on the plot eye in the first half. But I think it was a good introduction to those mechanics. And I think it was a good introduction just to general feeling of the world. I think the descriptions on the character sheets, the pre-gens, were good and gave you kind of an idea what was up with the characters and kind of their interactions with the world. So I think that was good.
So I think that's a good thing to bring up, because I think one of the main selling points is going to be the plot die, right? The plot die and for those of you that don't know, it's basically a D6 that has 2 sides that are devoted to complications, something that can, make your adventurers' lives more challenging, but they do give you a small bonus to whatever check or whatever you're trying to do. Or you have opportunities, which are bennies that your characters get that can either help you help you with your success, or find something adjacent to your success that can help your characters along, or something like that. You don't need the plot die to get opportunities and complications. Those can be triggered by rolling a 20 or a 1 respectively. But it is, for having a D20 system, and most people are going to draw on experience from like Dungeons and Dragons is going to be the game that they probably have a lot more experience coming over to this. I think that simple dice, that addition, was nice. The question I have is that you said it was used too much. I'm not sure I know like how to properly raise the stakes with that based on how little we played, because it felt like everything in the beginning, because you're being chased by a chasm fiend, is like already high stakes. Like, then how does it feel?
Well, I think in the rules they said it's 1/3 of the time or something like that, right? And it definitely was more than 1/3 of the time that first adventure, or the first half of the adventure. And then we used it almost not at all at the end. So I mean, it probably mathematically worked out to what they wanted at the adventure as a whole. It just felt a little heavy at first because, like you said, it's already high stakes, so pushing it really is kind of a difficult thing, which I can see that.
Because I mean, it felt like, and I mean, in my opinion, being chased by a chasm fiend is pretty high stakes, right? You should just roll a plot.
Well, death versus.
Well, it's a thing that if you turn and fight, you instantly die. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high, right?
Not instantly. There might be.
Well, you can't fight it. It was made pretty clear that you can't fight it. So,
yeah.
So yeah, I would say death is probably inevitable if you try and fight the chasm fiend. But so yeah, that is high stakes right away.
Now, most of I think the plot die in general is to be added when the GM wants to raise the stakes.
Right.
Do you like that component of it, or I mean, I don't recall if I saw any rules where the actual players got to do it. There might have been some talents or something that enabled them to roll a plot die that I.
Oh, see, I was under the impression that players could choose to raise the stakes.
I'll have to double check. I thought because the GMs are the one that trigger the stakes most often. Like, I think it like most of the time where you roll it, like, I would raise the stakes like in most situations. But I think that there may have been talents that allowed players to roll a plot die in addition to their regular roll. But
possibly
in the comments, if you want to correct me, go ahead and throw that down there. So, but if it is the fact that the DM does it most of the time, would you want it to have the ability for the players to raise the stakes like that, or would that be like a homebrew rule?
I think it's specific moments, like really plot twisting, plot heavy moments. I think if I would assume that the GM would do it anyways, but if the player wants to do it, like, this is an important thing to my character. This is me turning onto the path to accomplish one of my goals, kind of thing. I think it's totally appropriate. Whether or not the rules allow it, I guess we're going to find out. But
yeah, we'll have to double check.
I'm going to need to play more to judge the plot die on a whole. But go ahead, Brent.
If I was the GM and running a game, I would present it. I wouldn't just say yes, roll the plot dice. I would present it. I would be like, do you want to push this? Do you want to add to the stakes of this roll in this instance, just to give the player more agency over that potential failure? Like if they roll that 1 on the plot die, just to give more agency to that, because I think it gives them a chance to really kind of use that kind of a spotlight mechanic to say, I'm doing something heroic now, or I'm doing something important. So I'm gonna go ahead and I agree with you. I'll push the stakes and then have them do it. I think it would happen less, which I think that makes it more special and it'll give it more gravity for the players. And like I said, it'll give them a little bit more agency in being like, oh, you made me roll the plot die, and
this or at least now I recognize that this is a higher tension activity than I may have anticipated. And that could be a way for them to say, okay, well, if I go this route, I roll with a plot die. So the opportunity and complications present themselves. But also at the same time, maybe I adjust my approach to make it a little safer for my character, so I don't have to worry about a complication or something like that. That could be an interesting conversation to have with your players and everything. Now, there were a couple things that were also present in this adventure, and that was like the endeavors and stuff like that. So, for example, there was the chase between the chasm fiend and you guys when you were trying to get to the small crevice and everything, where you had to choose how you were proceeding, and it was effectively like a 4th edition skill test. Like that was pretty much how it felt. And of course, in this game, and the hard part about it is that because you had so few people, the test result was like hit X number of successes before you hit X number of failures. And I thought that, it gave me an opportunity because you guys did have, quote unquote, so many missed dice. I mean, you guys failed a lot. I mean, you can't, I'll say it now. You failed a lot in this Cosmere adventure. Your dice were more
they were very cold. Yeah,
they were very cold. But that's basically why Varda, killed the Bridgeman with the spear. Is that was going to be the failure outcome from the thing. But do you like the those kind of skill endeavors, and like, do you feel that endeavor was tension filled and interesting, or how did you like that?
I thought that was a pretty good use, because I usually don't like skill challenges. We've talked about this before on the show. I don't usually like skill challenges because a lot of times it kind of feels like just rolling dice for no reason, or just rolling dice to roll dice. And that's nothing on you. That's just a general feeling I have for skill challenges. It's been in every game I've ever played where they've been used. I think in this case, there felt like there was stakes to the skill challenge, like getting the survivor across, me carrying the survivor across the finish line. I felt like it made sense. in this case, versus if it was just me running, like if it was all of us just running alone, I don't think it would have made sense. I think it would have just been fine.
All right, you've gone 10 feet. Roll the dice again.
Yeah, each of us just roll one dice and you make it or not. Again. But because there was that added stakes of me, like I could drop the guy or what happened where somebody killed him. I think that is the kind of the thing that there was obvious to me with this skill challenge, which doesn't happen a lot. There was a benefit and a drawback. Like there was a thing that was going to happen if we did good and a thing that was not going to happen with you bad. A lot of times I feel like skill challenges are like, okay, roll to see if you get through the pass. Okay, you just lose a lot of hit points because you didn't do well. Well, what if we would have succeeded? You would have made it. Well, we made it anyways. Now we're just weaker.
Well, yeah. Now you got frostbite.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, there's no benefit to us having gotten.
Jeff lost his boots. We don't know how he lost his boots, but he lost his boots.
Exactly. There's no like the benefit of getting through doesn't seem to weigh the risk of the dice challenge. And I think in this case it did because I was trying to run with the guy. If that wouldn't have been there, I may have felt like it was just.
Yeah. And do you feel like that was an appropriate level of consequence because you guys had failed those to have the one bridgeman not make it?
Yeah, I think that was good. I think that played out very well. It also, I think, I like the ability of my character at the time to use that leadership ability to help other people with the roles too. I thought that was cool. And I enjoyed that part about my character probably more than his ability to fight because the leadership stuff was kind of cool.
And that's kind of neat. And what about you, Jeff? Did you like how flexible it seemed like the system was a very permissive system, in my opinion?
Yeah, no, I liked it. In general, I like the skill challenges better than Brent does, I think. But I've been part of bad skill challenges. This was a good one. I've been part of some where, like Brent said, it's just like, okay, roll the dice.
Yeah.
Okay, you failed. Roll the dice. Okay, you succeeded. Roll the dice. Okay, you failed. I think that the best skill challenges that I've ever been in, and this was very good, give you some narrative control to use one of your skills that you think might be applicable in the situation and say, I'm going to use my command skill. I'm going to use my agility. I'm going to use my athletics. I'm going to use my perception to make sure that I don't trip on a log, or a rock kind of thing. And I think that's part of what pulls you into it. I think bad skill challenges feel like you're just rolling dice because there's no investment from the players end. And I felt invested. We were trying to get two wounded people away from we were trying to get ourselves away from the Chasm Fiend, but we were trying to save everybody in our already diminished group from the bridge crew that plunged over the edge, right?
Yeah.
We were already took severe casualties. So we were trying to get everybody safe. And there were stakes. I thought it was narrated pretty well. I thought the Chasm Fiend was a very clear and present danger. So I was invested. I felt Brent was invested. I felt you were invested as the GM.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good example of a I'm using the generic skill challenge term.
I think they called it an endeavor.
You can call it a clock. You can call it an endeavor. You can call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
But they all work eerily similar to each other.
Sure. And so the endeavor, there was also an endeavor where you were part of the deciphering of the glyphs later in the temple. And that endeavor was a little bit different because, you have to take multiple approaches to how you decipher the glyphs and everything. Did you feel the same level of investment in that one? Or because that one?
I did at the end. Right at first, I was a little frustrated.
Yeah,
because I was assuming it was just going to be like a single roll, like it was going to be a single check. So, well, I'm going to kind of do this, and then I was only upset because it made me think. Do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't fully prepared to think in the moment, and then I had to actually like, oh fuck, I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
Oh, how would I approach this, right? So I had to bring a little bit of my meta knowledge in with me for how my character would kind of do that, and at the end, I really liked it. I guess I fought it a little bit, and the fighting it didn't feel good. You know what I mean? Like I didn't say that to you, but that's what was going on in my head. I don't know if you guys caught it on the live stream, but I was like,
well, it felt like it started a little bit slow and picked up momentum when you started succeeding.
Well, yeah, I started feeling like I was on to something, and then it was like, oh, well, then I would then I would do this, and I would approach it like this, and I would. I got into it. It's be invested in the game you're playing. It makes a difference.
And I think one of the things that was good about this too is it was short. Like there were short skill tests instead of a lot of rolls. Like a lot of rolls. I think sometimes people and game writers have a tendency to fall in love with this mechanic, and they will like, okay, it's 10 rolls over the course of you doing this thing, and it's like,
would you say 17 successes out of 30 is too much, Brent?
Exactly, that's way too many times of rolling a dice. Like you are literally, oh Jesus.
Well, but it's interesting though, because party size would matter in this case, right? Because the first sprint would have been literally, if you had a standard party of 4, there's a total of 10 rolls you get to make effectively, because it's a 6 and 4. The second one is a 3 and 3. So if you have 2 people doing that, that's 2 people making 3 rolls each effectively, and that's not a ton, and that's assuming you're failing and succeeding at the same rate, right? Whereas 3 successes when the DC is your chance of getting that is greater than 50%. It's not too terribly difficult. But I think it was good. I think that they introduced endeavors in a way that I feel is the way that you should run them a little bit better. And I feel the emphasis on the narration, the consequences, and everything like that is pretty much what I've seen in previous writings. People who have written articles about why skill tests are both the best and the worst thing ever have kind of mentioned that exactly as you said, is that if you don't have the consequences that make sense, then it just feels like rolling a bunch of dice. And especially if you don't narrate the situation, then the dice kind of become, okay, well, you roll athletics checks 4 times and tell me how many successes you get. And that just feels dumb.
Yeah, that honestly, at that point, there's no reason why it shouldn't just be 1 check. Like if it's just me rolling the same thing a lot and there's nothing narrative going on. Yeah. And like Brent said, you make it by losing a few hit points. You make it by somebody almost dying. But at the end of the day, you still made it. Like, was it the Icewind Dale adventure that we played? Wasn't there a pass in that where there was a big skill check where we almost died because we were rolling poorly again? Am I totally misremembering that?
No, there was a little bit of that in there, and it was an attempt on my part for a skill check, but I don't think I did it as well in that one as I.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not trying to harp on it. I'm just
trying to put it in the back of my memories.
No, I don't think it was as successful.
Me talking about the snow thing. I don't think that was you that I experienced that in. I think that was a different game. I mean, there's similar settings, so it sounds like I'm saying that, but I don't think it was your game. It was a different game where somebody was like, you failed a bunch of times, you get attacked by a bear, and now you're like, you're like at half hit points for this next encounter, which basically it just felt bad. It was like, well, you just basically put us in a situation where we're significantly weaker for the next encounter, and we couldn't do any and it was completely by chance. It was 100% a coin flip on whether or not this was going to turn out well, and there was no advantage to it. Like even if we'd done well, it just meant that we got there with full hit points, which is an advantage. It's not an advantage, no, because we would have because if they wouldn't have made us roll, we would have got there with full hit points anyways.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think that if there are consequences, it's always nice when you can add some sort of advantage that comes from it too. In this case, the Chasm Fiend, I don't think that there was necessarily a super advantage other than the fact that you made it with all of your NPCs that you felt responsible for. Like it was very much a narrative benefit. It wasn't really a mechanical benefit, but
it worked. But as the 2 players, I think it worked on both of us.
Well, right. Like my character had made a decision that he was going to try and get as many of the rest of the survivors to survive as possible. And that choice taken away from him because of the failed skill rolls was an important choice.
Well, there was one benefit, is that if you had Doral or whatever the name was, the bridgeman, you should have been able to get advantage on your survival check, but I forgot about that in the moment.
Hey, if we had $1 for every time one of us forgot something important about our character, about a rule, and then remembered it 3 sessions later, hey, shouldn't I have gotten advantage on that one?
Probably would be buying sandwiches for lunch. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So the other thing that was interesting that I don't think we really fully explored in the adventure was that they did have kind of a social interaction challenge that you could have more deeply explored with the singers and the war forms and the nimble forms. Is that because basically talking to the listeners is that you can actually kind of engage in like a social combat situation where the listeners actually spend focus to resist your attempts to do these kind of things. You can create quite a back and forth if you're interested in really role playing that out. And it does talk about like how this plays out, that if you lose focus first because you're resisting them, or you spend all your focus in the course of trying to convince them that you're no threat and have a peaceful resolution, then they just attack you because they're like, screw these guys. But at the same time, if you make them expend focus, or you provide a compelling enough argument, you can obviously leave the situation unharmed. But or if you show them that you were basically tomb robbers, then they would also fight you to death. But whatever. You're stealing our history. Okay.
No, we're not.
Yeah. But I did think that was an interesting component, and I do like the idea of having ways to resolve those kind of non-combat challenges with a more mechanical, like, well, you made an okay argument, you rolled some good dice. Well, I'm going to resist in this case. So you have to continue defining your compelling reason as to why we don't fight. However, I do feel like sometimes that could be a little bit tricky, because then it can just be like GM fiat to say like, oh, I don't like your argument. One focus, try again.
Right.
And that may feel not as good, especially if you'd
have to be careful.
Yeah, especially if you put your best argument forward right out of the gate. So,
well, and it also honestly, it depends on the types of players. Like, we've talked about this. There are some players that don't want to be the central focus of stuff like that. I would hope, I'm not going to tell them they can't play whatever character they want to play, but one of them may have picked to be, a more charisma, to use a D&D term, driven character that's trying to charm or convince or, lie to people.
Yeah.
They may not want to be part of that. So I think the GM has to know his group, but yeah, I think you're right. You'd have to be careful, because you could make it just seem punitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, like, I know you got that 16, but they resist.
Yeah. Like, and as the GM, I think that's going to be one of those things you have to, like, if you feel like they put their best argument forward, but it's a bad argument, you're like, well, okay, that argument doesn't stick. Try again, Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. You're basically saying you should leave us alone because you should leave us alone. Try again.
But I mean, that's what the dice roll's for. I mean, there's a lot of people who are charismatic enough to make stupid arguments sound plausible. So if they roll well, like that is why the roll's there. Because if their argument is fine, if their argument makes airtight sense, like, don't even make them roll. Like, if you feel like there's airtight sense in the as to what happened,
wow,
it's like, oh well, that makes total sense. I don't know. I don't have any like. You have to take it upon yourself to also be, well, what would be my rebuttal for this? Oh, I can't think of one. That means they succeeded.
That's good.
I would say that's where I would say is if they're like, oh well, leave us alone because we're, dudes hanging out on the plateau. Like, if that's your argument, like, okay, go ahead and roll some dice, and you better roll well. Like, that's fine. But like, if they're like, oh no, there's these reasons and this specifically, and you're like, oh, I can't actually think of a rebuttal of that. Like, it's like, oh, I would give them the credit for that. I would be like, yep, you're good.
I'm just glad that the system has a mechanic for that type of interaction. Yes. Whether you use it or not, right? Each individual GM is going to do it a little different. And some might even homebrew some of that stuff. But I like that it's there, that there is an option to have dialogue instead of just pulling swords.
Yeah, well, and I think but that's good, and I'm excited for the games that we've recently been looking at that have offered. They've really offered to de-emphasize combat for the solution to everything and provide mechanical solutions if you so choose to go to things that are social interactions and exploration interactions. Because I mean those exist in D&D, and obviously we haven't seen the D&D 24 rule set to see if those have been changed, adjusted, altered, improved. But at least in previous editions, they've had a fairly basic framework about how you encounter people. And I think that there's a lot more nuance to conversations to find a balance between that person who really likes to role play and that kind of their inner thespian comes out versus that person who has struggles in doing those kind of things on the spot, but says, hey, my character has a great skill at this. I'm going to give you the gist of what I want to say, and then I'm going to roll. That kind of stuff all has its place if the rules really help it out there. I think the only other thing we really had was combat, and combat felt very much like a D20 combat. But what are your guys' thoughts on how combat went? I mean, the one little sliver of combat we got because you basically humiliated Captain Selenar. How did you think that guys went?
Well, I mean, my rolling was terrible. But other than that,
I thought on hits that I thought there was a lot of damage being dealt back and forth, and there was a lot. Combats certainly aren't going to go on for 10 rounds, and I know this was first level, right? So we're not dealing with a ton of hit points, but it felt fatal, like potentially fatal.
Yeah. Well, and it was a nice lethality to it right out of the gate.
No, it felt assuredly fatal. Like there was a good chance that if there wasn't any intervention, my character would have totally died.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. Like the thing about it is that's interesting is that first of all, the turn order, like this is the first time I think we've really had a fast, slow initiative setup. Did you guys like
I feel like I've done that before in a system, whether it was with you guys or not, I don't know, but it's been a long time. Mm-hmm. So this was the first time I had been part of that in quite a long time.
I was okay with it, other than what's the advantage of going fast versus going slow?
So the advantage of going fast is that you get to act first, so you're resolving things.
Right. I mean, that's the obvious one.
But you only get 2 actions when you go first, whereas if you go slow, you get 3 actions. So you get a third action point effectively to spend. And for anybody that hasn't really looked at the books, you can spend actions on various things like bracing, effectively giving your ability to give the opponent disadvantage for all their attacks, disengaging. You can actually use it to gain advantage. We've recently played a game where gaining advantage was a huge component of how DC 20 combat works. You just kind of spend your action points that might literally I love the action points of DC 20. But there's other things that you can do to resolve those. And when you go slow, you can do bigger actions like shoving, recovering, or grappling, and still have an extra action for moving or striking.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't really understand that. So, but that makes more sense. And the reroll stuff makes more sense. So.
Yeah,
I think in our discussions on initiative, I think I've been clear that I like initiative systems with a certain amount of flexibility. Mm-hmm. I think in a game that has tactical combat, there are characters that should be going first and setting things up, and characters that should be coming in second and following up on the setup, right? Mm-hmm. So I like that you have that, and then you also have the fast and slow, right? Like we could kind of negotiate between us when it was the party's turn to go who was going first and who was going second.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And assuming that you had both decided fast or both decided slow, right?
Yep.
So I liked it. I would like to get more combats under before making a final judgment, but
yeah,
I thought it worked well.
Yeah, and to Brent's point, one comment that we had was that we could have used the graze mechanic because you spend focus to graze, and you guys don't have a ton of focus. I think you had only 5 focus, Brent. Does that sound
4.
About right? 4 focus.
So it's not 5.
It's not like an unlimited pool that you can do this, but if you really feel the stakes are necessary, you can use your focus in a desperate attack and get a graze out of the deal. Well, they can make that combat.
A graze probably wouldn't have helped me, but you're right. That would have been more helpful. Doing some
would have been more helpful than what actually happened.
Yeah, exactly. Doing some damage would have been more helpful than doing nothing.
But I think I didn't use any of my focus points because I think it's just the newness with the system. Yeah. And some of my use of focus points is when I am in combat and I performed exactly 1 combat action and then
and smashed it.
Killed the guy. Yeah, I smashed it. So I didn't have to use a focus point.
Yeah, and the one thing that we probably, and because basically when you roll an attack, you roll your attack die, you roll your damage die, and if necessary, you roll the plot die. But so basically, what ends up happening is that, so in case people are wondering, like if you miss with your attack die, what you do is you can spend a focus point to graze. And then, of course, you can, if you have an attack that affects multiple opponents, you can spend one focus per target to basically, get more people in the impact. And that does damage equal to the total rolled on the damage dice. So there's even a component of it being like, well, if you rolled your attack and you rolled a 1 on your damage dice, then the benefit of a graze would have been minimal, right? Like unless I know this guy is like, whatever the sliver of life, I'm not gonna literally graze him.
Right.
I could give him a nick with the razor blade. His shaving does more damage to him in the morning. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was deadly, and I like fast-paced combat. I've been moving away from slow, laborious combat for a long time now. So anything that takes more than, like, if I have to spend 45 minutes on like a basic encounter, it's too much. And I feel like D&D, I was spending a lot of like 30/45 minutes on a fight that was just like
by the end where everybody's checked out.
Yeah, everyone's just
right.
like,
it's just a lot of dice rolling for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot more dynamic and a lot more interesting. So, final. I guess your final thoughts. How'd you like the game, et cetera, and then I think we can wrap up. What do you guys think?
It was good. I enjoyed the world, the peek at the world, and the mechanics seemed all right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. If you're interested in learning more about the Cosmere RPG, I think the Bridgenine is a good introduction to the system. Like, you're not going to get everything, but it's going to give you a lot. They'll use some of the pre-gen characters, look those over, and find the ones you like. Give it a try, because I think you'll like it. I endorse it as a really quick introductory scenario. So
yeah, it's got a surprising amount of depth mechanically to get you ready for the game and all that stuff. Yeah. So okay, well then I think we can say that we enjoyed this one. None of us were really fans of the Stormlight Archive or anything like that going into it, so we have our amateur, new, eyes wide open approach to this. But of course, if you want to share your thoughts, anybody in the comments down below, let us know your experience with Bridgenine. What did you like about it? What did you maybe think could have been improved, or just in general your thoughts about the Cosmere RPG? Are you a 5th edition player that's going to Cosmere? Have you never played before and you're going to try it for the first time? We like hearing your stories. We really appreciate it. So Jeff, how do they contact us outside of
well, if they're on Facebook, Threads, or Twitter, they can find us by searching for @Rolewise. Or if you're not on those, you can email us, rolewiseguys@gmail.com.
And thank you for joining us as always. We appreciate having you here. We hope you enjoyed our peek at Cosmere and our playthrough. Let us know what else you'd like to see, if you'd like to see more of this as it's in development or anything else. And as always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there, everybody.
Thanks.
See ya.